Hello and welcome to episode number 2 of the Business Analyst podcast. You are listening to me, Michiel Erasmus. Today we're going to speak to Marc Thibault about storyboarding, use cases, the role of project management, and Marc is going to introduce himself now. So here it is, Marc.
Okay, I've been working for longer than I care to think. And really, I'm a systems analyst, but these days we call that a business analyst.
Okay.
The role of the business analyst used to be just around the business process area, but it's expanded to almost all the way into the design of information products to support the business.
Okay.
And of course, that's always been the goal, is to support the business.
It's really nice that you can explain it this way because, people that work far away from the business, they have no interaction to know, what the user wants. They just make things. How do you make a link between what the business wants and what the developer eventually see or get?
Well, as I was saying when we were talking before, is you're obviously the victim. I've been the victim. If the business analyst doesn't do the job right, then your job is hell, and that's part of what we need to avoid. Because if the developer's job is hell, then they're going to produce a product the client's not going to be very happy with.
Okay.
So it's important to be able to do the translation. And this is one of the things that, one of the unfortunate things that's happened to our industry. We no longer use architects. And in every other industry, it's the architect's job to understand both the business and whatever it is they're building, whether it's a bridge or an office building or somebody's house. They do the translation between what the client is looking for and expects and what needs to be built. And they understand the language on both sides. So I can talk to you about your values and your culture and all of these things to get that part right. And I can talk to the techies in techie talk.
Okay.
And that's why it's sort of silly, but you don't want an MBA as a business analyst.
Yeah.
You want somebody who's been on the techie side, at least for a little while, so they know the lingo, the language, and they can translate customer expectations, client expectations into technology. So there's an architecture role. And this is what I was saying. The role of the business analyst has expanded.
Yeah.
And it's expanded to include what we used to call architecture.
Okay.
You really need to be able to do design.
What is your understanding of design? Do you mean like you have to be able to grasp a business problem, to model it into a visualization thing for a user to understand, or do you mean like by design take a technical architecture and think what the business wants and apply all type of servers and databases to that situation?
All of the first and a lot of the second. Obviously, you need to be able to model the business and to describe a solution or a program or a project in a way that the user can understand and say, yeah, that's what I want. And generally, that's a lot of views. The same as an architect for a house.
Okay.
Will show you a blueprint. He'll show you a walkthrough. He'll do sketches from different angles. The business analyst needs to be able to do that with the client. Show storyboards. Perhaps, if it's interesting enough, screens. Use cases work that way. You can walk the client through executing executing use cases.
Okay.
Which is an awful lot like a walkthrough of a house.
Okay.
Right? Well, here's the living room, and this is what you would see when you walk in, and what's associated with it. So you need to be able to do all of that part. But that has to be translated.
Okay.
So that means, at least at a high level, you've got to be able to take that requirement and bring it to the point where the programmers are ready to work. And what that means varies from place to place. You have to be able to gauge the programmer's capability. I've been in situations where the only thing I could allow them to do was code. I've been in other situations where I did some high-level class diagrams identifying the key data units and did use cases with some activity diagrams and sequence diagrams showing how it works at the interface and not worrying about the rest. And we look at it, okay, well, how are we going to do the screens? Well, read up on common look and feel. Do them that way. And I could just let them go and be confident that they were going to build a good product because I had a high-level crew to talk to. So you have to be aware of the distinctions.
Marc, you just mentioned storyboards. I'm not so familiar. I don't know if everyone of our listeners are familiar with storyboards and use cases and activity diagrams. Do you mind?
Okay.
Well, I've in the world. In the world where I'm working now, at this moment in my current contract, if you say use case, they look at you like a sheep. And
we call that a doe. We call that a doe in the headlights. But yes.
Okay.
Yeah, use cases are not nearly as complex as people make them out to be. The basic idea behind a use case is that anything the system does has to be visible to somebody outside the system. Because if nobody outside the system sees what it does, there's no reason to implement it. No one will ever know it's missing.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's got to be somebody out there or some other system. But let's say somebody, and you can think, well, yeah, that somebody could be another system. The only difference is that people smile and systems don't. But there's somebody out there, and they're going to do something with the system. They have a goal. They get some value back from their interaction with the system. Okay. And those are the things that you want to catalog because that's what the user is expecting.
Okay.
So, and a use case is one of those interactions. Now, there are various rules and techniques and guides for how big or how small a use case, how much behavior you wrap up into one use case. And we could talk about that for hours, but we don't have hours.
Yeah.
But the basic idea behind a use case is the user walks up to the machine, does something, gets some value, stands up, and walks away with a big smile on their face.
Okay.
They've executed one use case and got the value out of it.
You mean like use case, you mean something like, say for example, you're making a travel reservation system and you have a use case where you say, add new reservation, or you make new reservation, and inside that use case, you execute various steps. You must select a product, you must select a client, you must select this, select that, add that.
And that's the detail. In that use case, you would define it from the user's point of view, okay, which would be get a ticket or reserve a flight.
Okay.
It would be that kind of thing. An ATM machine, get some cash. That would be your use case.
Okay.
So anybody who's familiar with databases is going to recognize a use case as being atomic. Like an atomic transaction, a use case is atomic. It does one thing, it does it well, and it either does it completely or fails.
Okay.
But that's, that's getting into what's a good use case, which we really don't have time for.
Okay, I just want to interrupt you because before don't want to spend too much time on this. But you also mentioned storyboards, and I've heard that term before, and I heard that it's possible to use storyboards or use cases. So what's the difference, or when would you use that?
No, the storyboard is the next step. It's an architectural view in a sense. So given the use case, you want to look at it from the point of view of what happens with a keyboard and a screen, or whatever it is that the user is using to interact. Okay. And the storyboard basically deals with what's the information that the system presents, what's the information that the user can change, what are the functions that the user can do. So basically, what it comes down to is labels, editable fields, and buttons. Every user interface can be presented as a combination of those three things.
Okay.
If you include a drop-down selection as being an editable field with preset values. Okay, so it comes down to using those three things, and for a particular use case, or for a particular large part of a use case, this is what the information world is going to look like to the user.
Okay.
Now, when you're doing these things, you're thinking in terms of the interaction. What does the user know? What does the user want to know? What does the user want the system to do, etc.
Okay.
And so that one storyboard encapsulates that information. It might turn out to be many screens.
Okay.
Okay. Like it might be one of these, wizards that takes you one step at a time through a whole bunch of screens to do this. Or you might end up with one screen that has several storyboards in it. That's the user interface design, which you leave to the experts. The BA doesn't worry about that.
Okay.
You want a user interface designer to do that. And so what you're doing is between the use case and data models and the storyboard, you're giving the programmers and the user interface designers all the information they need.
Another thing which I want to know is where does a business analyst fit into a global project? Or for example, where does a business analyst work in all environments, in all types of businesses? Does it work at the lead directly with the client, or would they sit in the same, for example, physically in the same room as the developers?
My favorite is when the business analyst is essentially working for the client.
Okay.
Now, the most successful projects I've worked on as a BA have been those where the client hired me, not the CIO.
Okay.
If you're hired by the CIO, you have to explain in advance that you're going to go native and that your first priority is serving the client. And what you're going to try to do is make sure that what the CIO builds is what the client expects. If the CIO can't live with that, if he wants you on his team, you probably want to walk away and tell a competitor about the job.
Okay, you mean a CIO, that's a Chief Information Officer.
Yeah, whoever is responsible for the IT side.
Okay, so and that brings me to another subject is how would one determine the sponsor of a project? And sometimes you come into a project and
you don't know who's in charge.
Yeah, there's an IT manager, there's a director, there is someone else, and you have a job to do, but how do you determine? How do you make someone responsible from the client? What's your way? How do you do that?
Well, there are two viewpoints, and one of them is who's signing your check, because ultimately they have to be happy one way or the other. In terms of the project success, for me, I default to the project manager. If there's no project director or stakeholder committee or executive committee or whatever it is above the project manager or nobody identifiable, I'll make the project manager responsible, and we'll discuss that.
Okay. But you just mentioned a project committee. What's that?
Well, depending on where you are, there are various structures. One of the common structures is you'll have a project director. Sort of like the distinction between the director and the producer in a movie.
Yeah.
Anyway, you'll have a project director who essentially represents the business side, and he's helped out by a committee of stakeholders who meet very infrequently and give the project director his marching orders. The project director works with the project manager to get the project done.
Okay.
And usually the project director is the one who's holding the money.
Aha. Okay, guys, thanks for tuning in. That was the second episode of the Business Analyst podcast. You can tune in by going to my website, thebusinessanalystpodcast.blogspot.com, or you can write me an email at info@gdb1.nl. And also a quick message to my South African listeners. Dankjewel dat julle allemaal geluister het na my podsending. Ek hoop om binnenkort weer terug te kry op hier. So guys, tune in. Today was 5 May and I'll be uploading the next podcast in a few days. So have a nice day. Bye bye.